What happens when the X-Men suddenly arrive in the SCP Universe during the Broken Masquerade? The world already knows that anomalies exist, and the SCP Foundation is struggling to operate openly when a massive dimensional event brings Professor Xavier, Cyclops, Wolverine, Storm, Jean Grey, and the rest of the X-Men into their reality. But the Foundation doesn't see them as heroes. To them, the X-Men are a group of powerful, unexplained anomalies that could completely change the balance of the world. As the Foundation surrounds Xavier's school, Charles attempts to establish peaceful communication, but one unexpected incident threatens to turn first contact into a full-scale confrontation. Can the X-Men convince the Foundation that they are people, not anomalies to be contained? Or will the Broken Masquerade create an entirely new conflict? The sky over the Black Hills of South Dakota did not merely darken. It underwent a catastrophic structural failure. In a world already reeling from the Broken Masquerade, where the SCP Foundation's existence had been dragged into the searing light of public scrutiny, and the United Nations was still debating the legal personhood of sentient anomalies, reality was already brittle. When the reality-folding feedback loop between the mutant Proteus and the Cerebro unit ignited, it acted as a thermal lance against a sheet of glass. The atmosphere shrieked, a sound like tearing silk, amplified to a deafening roar. As a massive, ornate estate, the Xavier Institute for Higher Learning was forcibly grafted onto the South Dakota landscape. The smell of ozone was immediate, thick enough to coat the tongue in a metallic, copper tang, followed by the jarring scent of New York autumn leaves and manicured lawns appearing in the middle of a high-security Foundation exclusion zone. For the Foundation, this was not a miracle. It was a cantilever-class reality restructuring event. At Site 19, less than 300 miles away, the Hume counters, devices used to measure the thickness of reality, dropped into the red. Within seconds, the Foundation's automated response protocols, refined by decades of secrecy and sharpened by the desperation of the post-reveal era, swung into motion. This was no longer a secret war, but it was still a war. All units, this is Overwatch Actual, a calm, synthesized voice broadcasted across encrypted channels. We have a massive spatial displacement at Sector 4B. High Hume distortion detected. Deploying mobile task force. New 7 hammer down. Classification: uncontained anomalous humanoids. Secure the perimeter. No one goes in, and nothing comes out. Inside the mansion, the world felt like it had been turned inside out. Scott Summers, known to his team as Cyclops, pushed himself off the floor of the foyer, his ruby quartz visor glowing with a dull, suppressed heat. Beside him, Jean Grey gasped, her hands flying to her temples. Her mind, usually a beacon of telepathic clarity, was being hammered by something cold, clinical, and vast. It wasn't just the transition, it was the psychic background noise of this new universe. In their home reality, the psychic plane was a chaotic ocean of human emotion. Here, it felt like a labyrinth of steel doors, ancient whispers, and the chilling mathematical void of 1,000 containment cells. "Professor?" Scott called out, his voice rasping. Charles Xavier sat in his hover chair, his face pale and etched with an expression of profound sorrow. "Scott, we are not in New York. We are not even in our own world." His voice trembled, not with fear, but with the sheer weight of what he was sensing. "I can feel them, millions of minds, but they are terrified. They know about people like us, Scott, but they don't call us mutants. They call us skips. They call us special containment procedures." Outside, the horizon was no longer empty. The rhythmic, industrial thrum of Foundation transport VTOLs shook the air. From the clouds, heavy-duty transport helicopters began dropping Scranton reality anchors, massive, obsidian-like pylons that slammed into the earth with the force of meteorites. As they activated, the air around the mansion began to hum with a low-frequency vibration. It was the sound of reality being reinforced, pinned down like a butterfly in a collection box. To Storm, standing on the mansion's balcony, it felt like the very atmosphere was being suffocated. The winds she commanded became sluggish, the lightning in her veins flickering like a dying bulb. The Foundation was not alone in their arrival. Because of the Broken Masquerade, the veil was no longer there to hide the black and white liveries of the Foundation's armored columns. High-altitude news drones, belonging to CNN, the BBC, and independent streamers, were already hovering at the edge of the exclusion zone. To the world watching on their screens, this was another Site-19 event, another breach. But as the cameras zoomed in, they didn't see monsters or shifting blobs of flesh. They saw a group of frightened young people in yellow and blue uniforms standing on the lawn of a beautiful school. "This is Commander Vance of MTF Nu 7, a voice boomed over a long-range acoustic device, echoing across the hills. "You are currently in violation of the Global Anomalous Accord. Identify yourselves and prepare for containment. Any display of anomalous ability will be met with lethal force. You have 60 seconds to comply." Wolverine stepped out onto the porch, the metallic snick of his claws echoing in the sudden silence. The sound was sharp, defiant, and entirely anomalous to the Foundation sensors. "I don't know who these clowns are, Slim," Logan growled, his eyes tracking the snipers perched on the surrounding ridges, "but they smell like a mix of S.H.I.E.L.D. and a morgue, and they ain't here to give us a tour." "Steady, Logan," Scott commanded, though his hand drifted toward his visor. He could see the tanks, Leopard 2s modified with Foundation-grade experimental weaponry, leveling their barrels at the school's front door. He could see the soldiers in their high-tech tactical gear, their faces hidden behind gas masks and mimetic-resistant goggles. The X-Men had spent their lives fighting for a world that hated and feared them, but they had never encountered a world that had built a global bureaucracy specifically designed to put them in a box. In their world, they were the next step in evolution. In this world, they were a breach in the security of the universe. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. The spice must flow. Professor Xavier rolled forward to the edge of the steps, his mental projection reaching out, not as an attack, but as a bridge. He tried to find the mind of the man in charge, Commander Vance. He found a mind like a fortress, trained in counter-mimetics, shielded by Scranton technology, and hardened by the sight of horrors that would drive a normal man to madness. "Commander," Xavier's voice resonated in Vance's mind. "We mean you no harm. We are educators and students. There has been a terrible accident." Vance didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He tapped his earpiece. "Overwatch. I have a confirmed Class 4 telepathic intrusion. Requesting permission to deploy the monastic trigger. And tell the ethics committee to stand by. If these X-Men are what their uniforms say they are, we aren't just looking at a breach, we're looking at a Keter-class population expansion." The standoff was the spark. As a Foundation drone edged too close, its reality stabilization field clashing with the residual energy of the mansion, a bolt of uncontrollable optic fire erupted from Cyclops' visor, slicing through the drone and sending it spiraling into the dirt in a ball of flame. "Contact!" Vance screamed. "Engage! Target the reality benders first. Deploy the SRAs to full power." The battle for the future of two worlds had begun, not in a secret lab or a hidden dimension, but in the full view of a world that was tired of being afraid of the dark. The X-Men were about to learn that in this universe, protection didn't mean safety. It meant a cell. The drone wreckage had barely touched the scorched earth before the world dissolved into the frantic, calculated geometry of a Foundation tactical engagement. This was not the chaotic street fighting the X-Men were accustomed to when facing the Sentinels or the Brotherhood. This was hammer-down protocol. MTF Nu 7 did not charge. They suffocated. The air grew heavy, not with moisture, but with the artificial density of active Scranton reality anchors. To Jean Grey, it felt as though the very fabric of space was being turned into setting concrete. Her telekinetic reach, usually capable of lifting a jet, now struggled to deflect a single high-velocity canister of sedative gas. "Don't let them box us in," Cyclops shouted, his voice straining over the roar of the SRA pylons. He fired a low-intensity wide-angle beam, sweeping the ground in front of the advancing tactical teams. He wasn't aiming to kill. The X-Men's core philosophy remained, but the Foundation didn't operate on those terms. From the tree line, Foundation Screamer teams deployed directional acoustic weapons. A wall of dissonant, high-frequency sound hit the X-Men, tuned specifically to disrupt the equilibrium of biological organisms. Beast collapsed to one knee, his sensitive ears bleeding, while Rogue screamed, clutching her head as the noise vibrated through her stolen memories. "They're using our biology against us," Beast yelled, his scientific mind racing even as his vision blurred. "Scott, those pylons, they're grounding the local Hume field." They aren't just dampening our powers, they're trying to fix reality so we can't exist within it. Wolverine didn't care about Hume levels. He was a blur of yellow and blue, a feral engine of muscle and adamantium. He tore through a containment net made of carbon nanotube webbing, his claws sparking against the metal. He reached the first line of Foundation soldiers, but as he lunged, the lead operative triggered a wrist-mounted device. A blast of Glue-9 containment foam erupted, expanding instantly into a rigid, air-permeable block that encased Logan's torso and arms. He hit the ground, snarling, the foam hardening to the strength of granite in seconds. Target 01A immobilized, a soldier called out, his voice muffled by his respirator. Moving to Target 01B, deploy the telepathic nullcap. Above the fray, Storm ascended, her eyes glowing a terrifying solid white. She reached for the sky, seeking to summon a gale that would sweep these tin soldiers from her lawn. But the atmosphere refused to obey. The SRAs created a dead zone around the mansion. Every time she tried to condense the air, the anchors bled the energy away, grounding the lightning before it could form. She felt a phantom pain, a spiritual dehydration, as the elemental forces she called family were locked behind a clinical mathematical wall. Suddenly, a heavy-duty transport VTOL banked over the mansion's roof, but it wasn't dropping more anchors. It dropped a single reinforced containment crate. The sides blew off with explosive bolts, revealing a towering humanoid machine, not a sentinel, but a Foundation Scranton boxer, a piloted exoskeleton designed for close-quarters combat, with type green reality benders. This is Overwatch to Site-19, a cool feminine voice cut through the tactical chatter, originating from a command center miles away. Initial analysis of the X-Men group is complete. They appear to be a high-synergy anomalous task force. DNA sampling from the debris suggests a common genetic marker. We are classifying this as EVD7421, the X gene. Initial threat level, Keter. At Site-19, inside a room bathed in the sterile, flickering blue of holographic displays, Dr. Aristone watched the battle through a dozen different sensor feeds. She wasn't looking at the heroism or the tragedy, she was looking at the data. On her screen, a strand of mutant DNA was being mapped in real time, alongside known anomalous pathogens. It's self-propagating, Aristone whispered to the silent O5 observer standing in the shadows of the room. It isn't a single anomaly, it's a biological divergence. If this X gene is allowed to persist in the general population, the baseline human Hume level will be permanently altered within 3 generations. This isn't just a breach, sir. It's a CK-class reality restructuring event in slow motion. We cannot just contain the individuals. We have to contain the sequence. The O5 observer, a silhouette of absolute authority, watched as Jean Grey unleashed a desperate psychic pulse that cracked the visors of the nearest MTF squad. And the public reaction? The Broken Masquerade makes this complicated, Aristone admitted. The drones are broadcasting this live. The public sees the Foundation attacking a school. If we move too harshly, we lose the little political capital we have left with the UN. But if we let them go, we lose the world. Back at the mansion, the tide was turning through sheer, cold efficiency. The Foundation didn't get tired, and they didn't get angry. They simply adjusted their parameters. They deployed mimetic trigger flares, strobe lights that flashed patterns designed to induce temporary paralysis in the human motor cortex. Cyclops, his eyes shielded by his visor, was the only one who didn't drop. He stood alone on the steps, his chest heaving, looking out at his fallen friends. Storm was being forced to the ground by a gravitational tether. Beast was unconscious. Bobby Drake, the Iceman, was being sprayed with a chemical endothermic suppressant that turned his ice into a brittle, useless slush. "Stop!" Xavier's voice boomed. Not through the air, but through the collective consciousness of every soldier on the field. It was a psychic scream of such raw authority that even the SRAs groaned under the pressure. The soldiers froze, their fingers hovering over triggers. Xavier pushed his chair forward, his brow dripping with sweat. He looked at Commander Vance, who stood near the wreckage of the drone, his rifle leveled at the professor's head. "You talk of containment," Xavier said, his mental voice echoing with a profound, weary dignity. "You talk of reality as if it is something you own. But these are children. They are a part of this world's future, whether your equations allow for it or not." Vance didn't lower his weapon. The future is what we make it, 01 Alpha. My job isn't to judge you. It's to put you in a box so the rest of the world can sleep. You're an uncontained variable. And the Foundation doesn't like variables. Then you leave us no choice, Xavier whispered. From the shadow of the mansion's arched doorway, a new figure emerged. He didn't wear the yellow and blue of the X-Men. He wore a cape of deep crimson and armor that shimmered with an inner violet light. Eric Lanesher, the master of magnetism, stepped onto the battlefield. He didn't look at the soldiers. He looked at the Scranton reality anchors, the massive metal pylons that were supposed to be the Foundation's ultimate triumph. Magneto smiled, a cold, sharp expression. He reached out a hand, and the sound of groaning metal filled the valley. "You rely too much on your toys, little men," Magneto said, his voice a low rumble of thunder. "You built your anchors out of iron. You brought a cage to a man who can unmake the world." With a flick of his wrist, the multi-ton SRA pylons didn't just deactivate. They crumpled like tin cans, their internal circuitry screaming, as Magneto turned the Foundation's own normalcy into shrapnel. The reality stabilization fields shattered, and for a moment, the Hume levels in the Black Hills didn't just return to normal. They spiked into the impossible. The collapse of the Scranton reality anchors felt like a physical weightlifting from the world. For the X-Men, the sudden surge of their own power was intoxicating and terrifying, like a diver surfacing too quickly from the depths. Storm didn't just summon the wind, she commanded the sky to scream. With a sharp upward gesture, a localized cyclonic gust tore through the valley, sweeping the lingering clouds of sedative gas and Glue-9 particles into the upper atmosphere. Jean Grey's telekinetic shield expanded in a shimmering violet dome, catching the Foundation's high-velocity projectiles and suspending them in midair like flies in amber. Magneto stood at the center of the devastation, his cape billowing in a wind that obeyed only him. Around him, the crushed remains of the multi-ton SRA pylons floated, orbiting him like the moons of a dead planet. He looked at Commander Vance, whose tactical HUD was blinking with a dozen system failure warnings. The Foundation's dominance, built on the premise that reality could be controlled through superior engineering, had been shattered by a single man's will. "You speak of normalcy," Magneto's voice carried over the roar of the wind, amplified by the magnetic resonance of the very air. "But your normal is a stagnant pond, a world that clings to its own limitations out of cowardice. My people are the lightning that breaks your stillness." "Magneto, enough!" Xavier's voice cut through the magnetic storm. He sat in the center of the lawn, his presence now a lighthouse in the psychic dark. "If you strike them down now, you prove every fear they have. You turn our school into a fortress, and our children into targets." The standoff reached a fever pitch. Foundation snipers adjusted their scopes, but their fingers trembled. The metal of their rifles was vibrating, singing under Magneto's silent command. Vance tapped his earpiece, his face pale as he listened to the voice of Site-19. "All new 7 units, stand down," Vance commanded, though the words seemed to physically hurt him. "Cease fire. Maintain a 500-meter perimeter. Do not engage unless fired upon. We have a diplomatic directive." The news drones, hovering like vultures at the edge of the zone, captured the moment for the billions watching. The image of the red-caped man standing amidst the ruins of the world's most advanced security technology was already going viral across the Broken Masquerade's internet. The Foundation was no longer the invisible hand. They were a defeated army in the court of public opinion. Minutes later, a high-definition holographic projector was airdropped into the neutral space between the mansion and the Foundation's line. A shimmer of light coalesced into a figure, a man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his face obscured by a blur of mimetic encryption that made it impossible to remember his features even as you looked at them. "Professor Xavier," the hologram spoke. The voice was smooth, devoid of emotion, the voice of a man who had presided over the containment of gods. "I am a representative of the O5 Council. We are the administrators of the world you have just disrupted." Xavier rolled forward, his expression one of weary resolve. "And I am a man who seeks only the safety of his students. Your hammer-down protocol is a strange way to open a dialogue, Administrator. In our world, Professor, an unpredicted variable is a threat to the stability of the species," the council member replied. "You and your X-Men represent a catastrophic biological anomaly." Our analysts have spent the last hour mapping your genetic sequence from the blood samples left at the perimeter. What you call a gift, we classify as a self-propagating, Keter-class reality-warping contagion. The X gene is not evolution, it is a breach in the fundamental laws of human biology. And who are you to define what is fundamental? Beast stepped forward, his blue fur matted with dust, his scientific curiosity momentarily outweighing his exhaustion. I've seen your files on the public servers since the masquerade broke. You contain entities that defy physics, logic, and time. You treat the universe like a warehouse. We are not objects to be shelved. We are sentient beings. Sentience is irrelevant to a containment breach, Dr. McCoy, the O5 replied coolly. A sentient hurricane is still a hurricane. If we allow your people to integrate, the normalcy we have fought for 10,000 years to preserve will dissolve. The human race will be replaced by a cacophony of individual humbenders. The world as it is known will end. That is a K-class event. Our mission is to prevent that at any cost. The cost is our freedom, Scott Summers snapped, his hand on his visor. You're talking about genocide by quarantine. The hologram turned its blurred face toward Cyclops. We are talking about the survival of the baseline human, but we are also pragmatic. The Broken Masquerade has robbed us of the shadows. We cannot simply disappear you without triggering a global uprising from the anomalous rights movements. Therefore, we offer a compromise. Magneto laughed, a harsh, metallic sound. Here it comes, the velvet glove for the Iron Fist. The Xavier Institute will be designated as a Provisional Containment Site X, the O5 continued, ignoring the interruption. You will be allowed to remain on these grounds. You will be provided with resources and medical care. In exchange, the perimeter will be maintained by Foundation security. You will not leave. You will not recruit. You will submit to regular biological and psychic monitoring. You will be protected from a world that, I assure you, will hunt you with far less mercy than we do. You want us to be your prisoners in a gilded cage, Jean Grey said, her telepathy sensing the cold, dark machinery of the O5's mind. You aren't trying to protect us. You're trying to study us until you find a way to switch us off. We are trying to ensure that the sun rises on a human world tomorrow, Ms. Grey, the O5 stated. If you refuse, the Global Occult Coalition is already positioning its orbital assets. They do not share our interest in containment. Their mandate is destroy. They see you as parathreats to be liquidated. Choose the cage, Professor. It is better than the grave. Xavier looked at his X-Men. He saw their anger, their fear, and their defiant spirit. He looked at Magneto, who was already preparing to pull the satellites from the sky if they dared to fire. Then, he looked at the news drones. The world is watching, Xavier said softly. You can't contain the truth anymore, Administrator. You can put us in this school, but you cannot stop the idea of what we are from spreading. We accept your compromise for now, to protect the children. But understand this, we are not your skeeps. We are the X-Men, and we will not be silenced. The O5 hologram flickered. We shall see, Professor. History is written by those who keep the gates. Welcome to the Foundation. As the hologram faded, the Foundation soldiers began to pull back, but they didn't leave. They began to unload massive concrete barriers and motion-tracking turrets. They weren't just building a perimeter, they were building a border between two versions of humanity. The peace at Provisional Containment Site X was a fragile, artificial construct. For 3 days, the Xavier Institute had been under a total blockade. The Foundation had erected a stabilization wall, a towering perimeter of lead-lined concrete and high-frequency emitters, around the school grounds. Inside the wall, the X-Men tried to maintain a semblance of a schedule for the younger students, but the atmosphere was suffocating. Every window looked out onto armored Foundation personnel and the silent, unblinking eyes of surveillance drones. In the headmaster's office, the air was thick with the scent of old parchment and the sharp ozone sting of Magneto's presence. Eric Lanesher paced the room like a caged panther, his crimson cape snapping with every sharp turn. Across from him, Charles Xavier sat by the window, his psychic senses stretched thin, constantly brushing against the jagged, anti-mimetic static the Foundation was broadcasting to keep his mind out of their tactical networks. They are cataloging us like warehouse inventory, Charles, Magneto hissed, gesturing toward the window where a Foundation science team was using long-range spectral scanners to map the students' heat signatures. They don't see children. They see KTEs in waiting. And while the Foundation measures our Hume levels, the Coalition is sharpening its knives. The Foundation is a bureaucracy of caution, Eric, Xavier replied, his voice heavy with exhaustion. They want to understand us. That is a far better alternative than the Global Occult Coalition's mandate of destruction, termination, and liquidation. As long as we are under Foundation protection, the GOC cannot touch us without violating the mandate of the Council of 108. You trust in paperwork while the sky is turning red, Magneto retorted. He was right. High above the Black Hills, orbiting in the cold silence of the thermosphere, the GOC's orbital satellite Lug's Spear was adjusting its telemetry. To the Global Occult Coalition, the X gene was not a biological curiosity. It was a Class A para-threat. Their mission was simple, the five-fold mission of survival, concealment, confirmation, protection, and destruction. With the Masquerade broken, the GOC had become the iron fist of a terrified United Nations, and they had no interest in the Foundation's long-term research goals. Suddenly, the psychic static outside the mansion didn't just rattle, it vanished, replaced by a void so cold it made Xavier gasp. Charles? Magneto turned, his hands already glowing with magnetic force. The Foundation! They're pulling back, Xavier whispered, his eyes wide. The mines at the perimeter, they're retreating into their bunkers. They've been ordered to clear the splash zone. A second later, the sky didn't just turn red, it ignited. From the upper atmosphere, a pillar of pure, concentrated kinetic energy screamed downward. It wasn't an explosive, it was a rod from God, a tungsten projectile traveling at Mach 10, aimed directly at the heart of the mansion. Jean, Magneto, now, Cyclops' voice roared through the halls. The X-Men had seconds. Magneto lunged onto the balcony, his arms thrust upward. He didn't just reach for the metal in the projectile, he reached for the very magnetic field of the Earth to create a repulsive cushion. Beside him, Jean Grey's eyes flared with the fire of the Phoenix. She didn't use her hands. She used the raw, unadulterated power of her mind to seize the air itself, hardening the molecules of the atmosphere into a diamond-hard barrier. The impact was not a blast, but a tectonic event. The tungsten rod hit the combined psychic and magnetic shield 500 feet above the roof. The shockwave shattered every window in the mansion and flattened the trees for miles. Magneto's knees buckled, his teeth gritting so hard they threatened to crack, as he felt the kinetic energy of a small mountain trying to crush him. Jean's nose began to bleed, her screams silent but echoing in the minds of everyone on the grounds. With a final guttural roar, Magneto diverted the projectile. The multi-ton rod skipped off their shield like a stone off water, hurtling sideways and burying itself into the distant hills with the force of a nuclear detonation. The earth shook, a massive plume of dust and fire rising in the distance. "Is everyone okay?" Storm called out, flying into the foyer, her cape tattered by the shockwave. "That was a warning shot," Scott Summers said, looking up at the sky where the clouds were being shredded by high-altitude engines. "Look!" Descending through the dust cloud were the GOC's elite termination units, the orange suits. Unlike the Foundation's tactical teams, these were not soldiers meant for containment. They wore high-intensity combat suits, powered armor equipped with reality stabilization modules, anti-gravity jump packs, and Veritas resonance cannons designed to destabilize anomalous biology. "Attention, known threat entities." A voice boomed from the lead GOC gunship, a sleek, black craft that looked more like a predator than a vehicle. "By order of the Global Occult Coalition High Command, you have been designated as a mass para-threat event. Your existence is a violation of the Human Species Integrity Act. Termination is authorized. Resistance will result in the deployment of Level 5 esoteric weaponry." "They're not even trying to talk," Rogue said, her skin glowing with the borrowed power of a dozen Foundation guards she'd touched during the initial skirmish. "They just want us gone." "Because they fear what they cannot control," Magneto said, rising from the balcony, his face a mask of cold fury. "Charles, your peace is a tomb. If you want these children to see tomorrow, you will let me do what must be done." Xavier looked at the GOC gunships as they opened their weapon bays, revealing the glowing muzzles of resonance cannons. He looked at the Foundation bunkers, where the O5's men sat and watched, waiting to see if the GOC would do their dirty work for them. "X-Men!" Xavier's voice resonated through the mansion, clear and resolute. "Protect the students. Hold the line, but do not let your hearts turn to stone. We fight for our survival, not for their extinction." The GOC orange suits hit the ground like meteors, their jump packs flaring. They moved with terrifying mechanical precision, firing beams of blue light, a frequency of energy that didn't just burn, but unraveled the molecular bonds of anything it touched. Cyclops met them at the front door. He didn't fire a wide beam this time. He focused his optic blast into a needle-thin line of pure force, punching through the chest plate of a lead-orange suit and sending the soldier tumbling back into the dirt. "Wolverine! Beast! Take the flanks!" Scott commanded. "Storm! We need those gunships out of the air!" Storm ascended into the heart of the dust storm. She didn't call for rain. She called for the lightning of the Black Hills themselves. The air around her began to hum as she drew the static electricity from the very ground, weaving it into a web of high-voltage arcs that danced between the GOC gunships. The craft's shields flickered, their electronics screaming as she bypassed their physical armor, but the GOC was prepared for Type Blue thaumaturgists and weather manipulators. The lead gunship fired a counter-ectoplasmic harpoon, a spear of energy that didn't aim for Storm, but for the spirit of the storm itself. It pierced the clouds, and suddenly the wind died. The lightning vanished. Storm fell, her connection to the elements severed by a technological god-killer strike. Ororo! Jean Grey's telekinetic hand caught Storm mid-air, lowering her gently to the grass, but the GOC units were already closing in. Magneto didn't wait for permission. He plummeted from the balcony, landing in the middle of a GOC squad. He didn't use the metal in their suits. He used the iron in the very soil beneath them. With a clenching of his fist, the ground erupted in spikes of jagged ore, impaling the orange suit's gravity packs. "You bring your spears and your god-killers to my home?" Magneto's voice was a tectonic plate shifting. "I am the master of the very force that holds your atoms together. You are nothing but dust in the wind of my evolution." As Magneto tore a gunship in half with a gesture, a new signal flared on the Foundation's monitors at Site 19. "Doctor," an analyst called out, his voice trembling. "Hume levels at Site X are reaching critical mass, but it's not just the mutants. Something is opening from the inside." A rift of shimmering, iridescent light tore open in the middle of the school's library. It wasn't the Foundation, and it wasn't the GOC. A woman in a flowing, multidimensional robe stepped out, her eyes containing the wisdom of 1,000 dead worlds. "The library does not care for your wars of normalcy," she said, her voice echoing through the chaos. "But it does not permit the burning of such rare books. X-Men, if you wish to live, follow me into the way." The Serpent's hand had arrived. The library of the Xavier Institute, once a sanctuary of leather-bound knowledge and quiet contemplation, was now the epicenter of a metaphysical hemorrhage. The rift, the way, pulsed with a light that didn't belong to the visible spectrum, casting long, shifting shadows that seemed to dance to a music only the soul could hear. The woman standing before the rift, her robes embroidered with constellations that shifted in real time, looked upon the X-Men with a mixture of pity and academic interest. "I am Alara," she said, her voice cutting through the muffled booms of GOC resonance cannons striking the mansion's outer walls. "I speak for the Serpent's hand. Outside, the jailers of the Foundation wait to put you in a box, and the book burners of the Coalition wait to turn you into ash. They fear you, because you are a new chapter in a book they want to burn. But the Wanderer's Library does not fear knowledge. It preserves it." "The Wanderer's Library?" Beast whispered, his eyes wide as he looked at the rift. He had heard whispers of such things in the darker corners of the Foundation's leaked databases. A transdimensional hub of all knowledge, accessible only to those who knew the secret paths. "You're offering us sanctuary in a pocket dimension?" "I am offering you a chance to exist without a serial number," Alara replied. Outside, the situation was deteriorating. Magneto was a whirlwind of fury, but even his mastery over metal was being tested. The GOC had deployed Hume grenades, small, localized devices that briefly spiked reality to such a high density that anomalous powers simply snapped. Every time one detonated near Magneto, his control over the iron in the air faltered, his crimson cape sagging as the weight of a world that hated him became literal. "Charles!" Magneto roared, his voice echoing through the psychic link. "The Coalition is bringing up a Gravel 6 reality stabilizer. If they deploy it, I won't be able to hold the roof up, let alone the sky. We are being slaughtered for the crime of breathing." Xavier looked at Alara, then at the terrified faces of the younger students huddled behind the reinforced bookshelves. For decades, his dream had been integration, to see mutants and humans walking the same streets, sharing the same sun. But this universe was different. This was a world where normalcy was a religion, and the Foundation was its high priesthood. Here, the middle ground was a graveyard. "If we go with you," Xavier asked, his voice trembling with the weight of his decision, "can we ever come back?" "The ways are many, Professor. But once you step outside the masquerade, you can never truly be normal again," Alara said. "You will be wanderers. You will be free, but you will be ghosts to the world that bore you." A massive explosion rocked the mansion. The GOC had breached the southern wing. Orange suits poured through the smoke, their Veritas cannons glowing. They didn't aim for the X-Men, they aimed for the structural supports of the building. They weren't trying to capture, they were trying to bury the anomalous event. "Scott, Ororo, Logan, get the children to the library." Cyclops ordered, his optic blast shearing the arm off an orange suit that had lunged through a hole in the wall. "Jean, help Magneto hold the perimeter for 2 more minutes." The mansion was a war zone. Wolverine was a red and yellow blur, his claws clashing against the GOC's energized combat blades. He didn't fight like a soldier. He fought like a cornered animal, his healing factor working overtime as the GOC's blue light beams carved furrows into his flesh. "Move it, kids! Into the glowing hole!" Logan growled, shoving a pair of terrified teenagers toward the shimmering rift. As the students began to scramble through the way, vanishing into a tunnel of light that smelled of old paper and rain, the Foundation's Overwatch watched through the few surviving drones. "O5 Prime, this is Site 19, Dr. Aristone shouted into her terminal. "The Serpent's Hand has successfully opened a way inside the exclusion zone. They're extracting the KTEs. If they get the X gene into the Wanderer's library, we lose all ability to track the contagion. We'll be blind to a Class K threat. Authorize the use of the Scranton nullifier," the cold voice of the O5 responded. "If we cannot contain them, we will anchor the mansion to this reality so firmly that no way can stay open. Level the site if you have to. Normalcy must be preserved." Back in the library, the air began to scream. A massive, invisible pressure began to descend upon the mansion. The Foundation had activated a localized Scranton nullifier, a device that didn't just stabilize reality, but froze it. The iridescent light of the way began to flicker and dim. The rift began to shrink, its edges crackling with black sparks as the Foundation's technology tried to stitch the hole in the universe shut. "The door is closing," Alara shouted, her calm mask finally slipping. "The jailers are pinning the world down." "Magneto! Jean!" Xavier called out. Magneto and Jean Grey descended through the shattered ceiling, landing in the library. Both were exhausted, their faces covered in soot and blood. Magneto looked at the shrinking portal, then at the walls of the school he had helped rebuild. He looked at Xavier, and for a moment, the two old rivals shared a look of perfect understanding. "They want a world of stone, Charles," Magneto said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Let us give them a world of fire instead." "Jean," Xavier whispered. "The Phoenix. You must hold the way open, just long enough." Jean Grey looked at the rift. She could feel the Foundation's anchors pressing down on her mind, trying to tell her that she was impossible, that her power was a glitch to be deleted. She felt the Phoenix Force stirring deep within her, not as a cosmic predator, but as the ultimate expression of life's refusal to be contained. "Go," Jean said, her voice vibrating with a power that cracked the floorboards. "I'll hold it." Her hair began to float, turning into a crown of living flame. She didn't just push back against the anchors, she consumed the very concept of normalcy around her. The Scranton nullifiers miles away began to melt, their internal Hume reactors overloading as Jean Grey turned the library into a sun. The way roared back to life, widening until it swallowed the entire back wall of the room. "Everyone through, now!" Cyclops yelled. The X-Men surged into the light. Xavier was the last, his hoverchair gliding through the threshold. He looked back one last time at the world of the SCP Foundation, a world of cold steel, secret files, and a sky filled with orbital weapons. "We are not your anomalies," Xavier thought, projecting the message to every mind within 500 miles, soldier, scientist, and civilian alike. "We are the future, and you cannot contain the tomorrow." With a final, blinding flash, The Phoenix flare died out. When the smoke cleared and the Foundation's tactical teams finally breached the library, they found nothing. No students, no X-Men, no Magneto. The room was empty, save for a single scorched book lying on the floor. It was a copy of The New Mutants. Its pages charred, but its cover still visible. Dr. Aristone stood in the ruins of the mansion hours later, her boots crunching on broken glass. She picked up the book, her hand trembling. "Report." The O5's voice crackled through her earpiece. "They're gone, sir," Aristone said, her voice hollow. "The Serpent's hand took them. We've lost the X-gene to the library." "And the public?" Aristone looked up at the sky, where the news drones were still circling, broadcasting the image of the empty, destroyed school, to a world that had seen the Foundation try to murder children. "The public knows everything, sir," she said. "The masquerade isn't just broken anymore. It's gone, and the world is starting to ask why we were so afraid of evolution." The transition through the way had been a kaleidoscope of impossible geometries and the scent of ancient dust, but for Logan and Rogue, the journey had ended in a jarring metallic scream. As the Phoenix fire had flared to its zenith, the Foundation's Scranton nullifier hadn't just tried to close the door. It had fired a reality snare, a high-Hume harpoon designed to tether anomalous matter to the local continuum. Logan had felt the tether snap around his soul, a cold, oily sensation that dragged him and Rogue out of the iridescent light and back into the crushing gray reality of the South Dakota exclusion zone. By the time the smoke cleared, the mansion was a scorched skeleton, and the two mutants were encased in Type K stasis coffins, destined for the deepest sublevels of Site-19. Logan regained consciousness not to the sound of birds or the hum of the Blackbird's engines, but to the rhythmic, soul-deadening thrum of a Scranton reality anchor. He was suspended in a horizontal glass cylinder, his arms and legs locked in magnetic clamps. The air inside the tube was thick with an aerosolized sedative, a cocktail of benzodiazepines and Foundation-developed monastic suppressants, designed to keep even a Class 4 regenerative anomaly in a state of chemical lobotomy. But the Foundation had underestimated the feral tenacity of the man known as Wolverine. His healing factor wasn't just a biological process, it was a relentless, angry spirit that viewed the sedatives as an invading army. His liver worked with a frantic, burning efficiency, purging the toxins even as they were pumped into his veins. Through the reinforced glass, Logan saw the blurred shape of a laboratory. It was a cathedral of clinical coldness, filled with the blue flicker of holographic monitors and the low, mechanical whine of surgical lasers. Two figures stood over a nearby table where Rogue lay, her skin pale, her breathing shallow. "The epidermal resistance is remarkable," a voice said. Dr. Aristone. She wasn't wearing tactical gear now. She was in a sterile white lab coat, peering through a microscope at a sliver of Rogue's tissue. It's as if her cells are hungry. They don't just exist, they reach out for ambient energy. If we can isolate the predatory mechanism of the X gene in Subject 01F, we might be able to develop a universal antigen for type green reality benders. "Proceed with the deep tissue biopsy," a second voice commanded. The O5 representative, still a blurred, mimetic smudge on the edge of Logan's vision. "We need the bone marrow. If the X gene is housed in the hematopoietic system, we can target it with a retroviral strike. We don't just want to contain these mutants. We want to cure the anomaly out of the human gene pool." Logan's vision cleared, a red haze of fury beginning to override the chemical fog. He saw a mechanical arm, tipped with a diamond-edged needle, descend toward Rogue's arm. The machine didn't hesitate. It began to drill. The sound of the drill was the last straw. Logan didn't scream. He didn't have the breath for it. He simply willed his muscles to expand, his heart slamming against his ribs like a captive bird. The magnetic clamps groaned. The Foundation's SRAs were supposed to stabilize reality, but Logan's adamantium skeleton was a physical absolute, a metal that didn't care about Hume levels or parascientific theories. With a roar that shattered the glass of his cylinder, Logan tore his right arm free, the magnetic clamp snapping with a shower of sparks. Snicked. The sound of his claws extending was a thunderclap in the sterile silence of the lab. Logan rolled out of the tube, his feet hitting the cold tile floor. He was weak, his movements sluggish as the SRAs tried to pin his anomalous biology to the floor. But he was moving. "Security!" "Breach in Lab 4!" Aristone shrieked, backing away as Logan stood up. his eyes two burning coals of animal rage. The lab doors hissed open, and a squad of Site-19 security personnel surged in, armed with Bolus 7 entanglement rifles. They didn't use bullets. Bullets only made Wolverine angry. They fired webs of electrified, carbon fiber mesh. Logan dived, rolling under the first volley. He was a blur of steel and fur, his claws slicing through the reinforced legs of the surgical table. As the table tilted, Rogue began to slide off. Her eyes fluttered open, the sound of the alarm triggering her own survival instincts. "Logan?" she rasped, her voice cracking. "Don't touch him, darlin'," Logan growled, slicing through the restraint straps on her wrists. "Just touch me." Rogue didn't hesitate. She reached out and grabbed Logan's bare arm. The effect was instantaneous. She didn't just take his strength. She took the raw, unyielding essence of his healing factor. The wound from the biopsy needle closed in a second. Her eyes cleared, the yellow and green fire of her stolen powers surging through her veins. "I feel angry," Rogue whispered, her voice deepening. "Good," Logan said, turning toward the security team. "Use it." The breakout was not a surgical strike. It was a riot. Rogue lunged at the nearest guard, her hand gloved only in the raw power she'd taken from Logan. As she touched the guard's helmet, she didn't just knock him back. She absorbed the Foundation's tactical training, the layout of Site-19, and the access codes for the sub-level security gates. "Level 3 is a dead end," Rogue shouted, her mind racing as she processed the guard's memories. "We have to head for the Euclid wing. There's an elevator there that bypasses the main security hub." They tore through the hallway, a two-person demolition crew. The Foundation's security was designed to hold things in, not to fight two highly mobile, intelligent combatants who knew their own weaknesses. Logan acted as the shield, his body soaking up the screamer acoustic blasts and the flashbangs that would have blinded any other man. Rogue was the spear, using her flight, borrowed from her own past, and Logan's durability to smash through the reinforced blast doors. As they reached the junction of the Euclid wing, the air grew colder. The walls here were lined with specialized containment cells, each one marked with a warning sign that would freeze the blood of any Foundation researcher. "Wait," Rogue said, stopping at a massive lead-lined door marked SCP-076-2. "The guy I touched. He was terrified of this room. He said if this guy ever gets out, the site is lost." "We ain't looking for friends, kid," Logan said, his ears twitching, as he heard the heavy clatter of MTF Sigma-10 units approaching from the rear. "We're looking for a way out." "Logan, if we open these doors," Rogue said, her hand hovering over the override panel she'd stolen the codes for, "the Foundation won't be chasing us. They'll be trying to save themselves." It was a cold, pragmatic choice. The kind of choice the Foundation made every day. Logan looked at the red emergency release lever, then at the squad of armored soldiers rounding the corner, their heavy incinerator units leveling their muzzles at them. "In this world, Rogue," Logan said, his claws sparking against the metal floor, "sometimes you gotta let the monsters out to fight the devils." Rogue slammed the lever. The alarms at Site-19 changed tone, shifting from a localized breach to a site-wide containment failure siren. The lead-lined door didn't just open, it was kicked off its hinges from the inside. A man stepped out, dark-haired, covered in shifting, abyssal tattoos, and carrying a blade made of literal shadow. Abel looked at the Foundation soldiers, then at the two mutants. He didn't care about the X-gene. He didn't care about evolution. He only cared about the harvest. "Finally," Abel whispered, his voice like grinding stones. "A challenge." As the Euclid-class entity lunged at the MTF squad, Logan grabbed Rogue's hand. "That's our cue. Move!" They vanished into the shadows of the service tunnels, leaving Site-19 to descend into the very chaos the Foundation had spent a century trying to prevent. The X-Men hadn't just escaped. They had proven that in a world of cages, the only thing more dangerous than a prisoner is the man who opens the locks. The Wanderer's library did not possess a ceiling. It possessed a sky of shifting, bioluminescent vellum, where the stars were the glowing spines of books, shelved on rafters, that drifted miles above the floor. The air was cool, smelling of ancient cedar, vanilla-tinged parchment, and the lingering, sweet ozone of Jean Grey's Phoenix flare. For the X-Men, the transition from the frantic, blood-soaked dirt of the South Dakota exclusion zone to this silent, infinite cathedral was almost physically painful. The silence here wasn't empty. It was heavy with the weight of every word ever written, every thought ever dreamed across 1,000 different versions of Earth. Professor Xavier sat in his hover chair at the center of a circular plaza made of polished obsidian. He looked up, his psychic senses reeling. In the Foundation's world, the minds of humanity were a frantic, fearful buzz. Here, the psychic landscape was a vast, orderly ocean. He could feel the docents, the library's inhuman, multi-limbed caretakers, moving through the stacks on the upper levels. They weren't human, but they possessed a profound, ancient sentience that respected the sanctity of the knowledge they guarded. "It's beautiful," Beast whispered, his fingers trembling as he reached out to touch a shelf containing volumes written in a script that seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at it. "It's a taxonomical miracle. Every species, every history, every possible timeline, documented and preserved." "Preserved in amber, McCoy," Magneto said, his voice echoing in the vast space. He stood near a fountain of liquid silver, his crimson cape draped over a shoulder, his eyes narrowed as he scanned the shadows. "A library is where things go to be remembered, not where they go to live. We are not a story that has ended. We are a people in the middle of our genesis." "Be grateful for the shelter, Eric," Xavier said softly. "The GOC would have seen us burned. Here, we have time to think, to breathe." "We don't have everyone, Professor," Cyclops said, his voice sharp with anxiety. He was pacing the Obsidian Plaza, his hand constantly hovering near his visor. "Logan and Rogue. They didn't make the jump. I saw the Foundation's anchors catch them. They're still back there, in the dark." Ilara, the Serpent's hand guide, stepped out from behind a massive pillar carved to resemble a weeping willow. Looked at Cyclops with eyes that seemed to hold the reflection of the library's infinite shelves. "The jailers are efficient, Scott Summers. They use their Scranton technology like a needle and thread, stitching reality shut so that no soul can escape their census. Your friends were caught in the seam." "Then we go back," Jean Grey said. She looked different now. The Phoenix fire had receded, but her eyes retained a faint, golden shimmer. The library seemed to vibrate in response to her presence, the books on the nearest shelves whispering as if trying to catch her attention. "I can find them. I can feel Logan's mind. It's like a distant, angry ember." "You cannot simply go back, Phoenix Bearer," Ilara warned. "The Foundation has declared Site X a non-existent zone. They have flooded the area with anti-memetic triggers and reality stabilization fields. If you attempt to open a way from within the library to a point currently anchored by a Scranton nullifier, you risk shattering the way itself. You would be lost in the between, a place where neither the library nor your home reality can reach you. The Serpent's hand does not just hide in these halls, do they?" Beast asked, looking at Ilara. "Your faction fights for the anomalous. You believe the world should know the truth. We believe that the veil is a shroud that chokes the world," Ilara replied, walking toward a massive floating book that hung in the air, its pages turning slowly in an invisible breeze. "The Foundation calls you anomalies, because you represent a world they cannot control. In the library, you are essential text. You are the proof that humanity is not a finished work, but a draft. The Foundation isn't just trying to contain you, they are trying to edit the human race. They want to delete the parts that don't fit their narrow definition of normalcy." She pointed to the floating book. "This is the archive of the Broken Masquerade. It records the ripples of your arrival. Because of you, the Foundation's public image is crumbling. In London, Paris, and Tokyo, people are taking to the streets. They saw the hammer-down protocol. They saw the book burners of the GOC try to murder students. For the first time in 10,000 years, the world is siding with the monsters. And what good does that do us if my people are in a cage?" Magneto demanded. "The library has many doors." "Eric leans her," Ilara said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The Foundation has many sites, but they all rely on the same network of reality anchors to keep the darkness at bay. If you wish to rescue your friends, you cannot fight the Foundation as a physical army. You must fight them as an idea. You must become a breach that they cannot categorize." "Ilara," Xavier said, his mental projection touching the edges of her mind with a gentle curiosity. "You speak as if you've seen this before. You speak of us as essential text. What does the library say about the X-Men?" Ilara looked at the professor, a sad smile touching her lips. "The library says that in every reality where a Foundation exists, there is eventually a correction. A force that arises to remind the jailers that life cannot be contained. In some worlds, it is a god. In others, it is a virus. In yours, it is evolution. The X gene is the universe's way of saying no to the status quo. But the Foundation has SCP-682. They have the Scarlet King. They have things that make our evolution look like a parlor trick, Scott argued. Why are they so obsessed with us? Because you are us, Jean Grey realized, her voice echoing with a sudden, profound clarity. The other SCPs, most of them are alien, or ancient, or accidental, but we are the human race. If we exist, then the Foundation's entire mission is a lie. They aren't protecting humanity from the anomalous. They are protecting humanity from becoming anomalous. We are the end of normalcy, and to the O5 Council, that is the ultimate K-class scenario. Suddenly, the silent air of the library rippled. A distant, rhythmic thumping sound began to echo. Not the sound of a heart, but the sound of an alarm. "The Ember," Jean gasped, clutching her head. "Logan? He just did something. He's out. He's in a place called Site 19. He's not alone. He's let something else out. Something very, very old." "The Able Entity," Xavier whispered, his face pale as he caught the psychic backlash of the containment breach. "He's using the chaos to hide their trail." "Then the door is open," Magneto said, his crimson cape flaring as he rose into the air. "Alara, show us the way to Site 19. If the Foundation wants to treat my people as anomalies, let us show them what a true Cater-class event looks like." Alara gestured toward a dark corridor between two rows of shelves that seemed to be made of living, twisted iron. "The way is open, but be warned. Site 19 is the heart of the jailer's power. It is guarded by the things they fear most. If you enter, you may find that the line between mutant and monster is thinner than you think." "We've lived on that line our whole lives," Cyclops said, adjusting his visor. "X-Men, move out." As they stepped into the dark way, the library seemed to exhale, the bioluminescent vellum above them glowing a deep, cautionary red. The story of the X-Men was no longer a secret history. It was becoming a legend that would burn the veil to cinders. The air in Site 19 didn't just vibrate. It groaned under the weight of 1,000 contained impossibilities. As the X-Men stepped out of the way and into the sterile, fluorescent-lit bowels of the Foundation's most secure facility, they weren't met with the dust and silence of the library. They were met with the screaming, red-pulsing chaos of a site-wide containment breach. The smell of ozone, scorched meat, and a chemical cocktail of Class A amnestics filled the corridors. Somewhere in the distance, the rhythmic, metallic clanging of Abel's shadow blades against reinforced blast doors echoed like the heartbeat of a dying god. For Jean Grey, the sensation was like being plunged into an ocean of freezing oil. Site 19 was saturated with Scranton reality anchors, not just the portable pylons they had seen in the Black Hills, but integrated, structural Hume-steadying grids built into the very foundations of the facility. To a telepath and reality manipulator, it was a sensory deprivation chamber. Her mind felt muffled, her telekinesis reduced to a faint, trembling ghost of itself. "The anchors here are operating at triple the standard Hume density," Beast shouted, his voice barely audible over the klaxons. He was holding a handheld Kant counter he'd scavenged from a fallen technician. The needle was pinned in the black. "They aren't just stabilizing reality, they're trying to turn this entire site into a fixed, immutable point in space-time. If they push the Hume levels any higher, our very biology might begin to reject its own mutations as anomalous errors. Then we find Logan and Rogue, and we get out before the Foundation fixes us into corpses," Cyclops commanded, his visor glowing with a suppressed, flickering light. They moved through the junction, a tactical unit born of 1,000 battles, but even their prowess was tested by the Foundation's architecture. The hallways were designed to be kill zones, equipped with automated Sentry 7 turrets that fired non-lethal but bone-shattering kinetic slugs. Magneto acted as their shield, his hands raised to divert the hail of lead, but his face was beaded with sweat. In this high Hume environment, every gesture felt like lifting a mountain. "There," Storm pointed. At the end of a long, blood-streaked corridor, two figures were fighting their way through a squad of Foundation Red Right-Hand operatives, the O5 Council's elite personal guard. Logan was a whirlwind of gore and silver, his claws shearing through the MTF's anti-anomaly armor. Rogue was beside him, her eyes glowing with a stolen, violet radiance, as she unleashed a kinetic shockwave that sent 3 soldiers slamming into the ceiling. "Logan! Rogue!" Jean called out, her voice a psychic needle that pierced through the tactical static. "About time, Jeannie!" Logan growled, his face a mask of half-healed lacerations. "This place is a meat grinder. We gotta move. The Able guy is tearing through the Keter wing, and the Foundation is getting ready to scuttle the site." "Scuttle?" Scott asked, his blood running cold. "Protocol 10 Alpha," Beast realized, his eyes widening. If a site-wide breach of Keter-class entities cannot be contained, the O5 Council authorizes a Hume collapse. They don't use explosives, Scott. They use the reality anchors to create a localized vacuum of zero Hume. Everything inside the site, everything anomalous, will simply cease to have ever existed. In the Overseer's observation room, 30 floors above the chaos, the O5 Council watched the reunion on a dozen flickering monitors. They weren't looking at the X-Men as people. They were looking at the can't counters. On the screen, Jean Grey's profile was flashing a brilliant, terrifying gold. "Subject 01 sees Hume level is rising," Dr. Aristone reported, her voice trembling. "She isn't just resisting the anchors, she's absorbing the stabilization energy. The Phoenix signature we detected earlier isn't a biological trait. It's an extra-universal constant. It's a type green entity of a magnitude we've never cataloged. She is a threat to the consensus," 051 said, a silhouette of cold, absolute authority. "If she reaches full potential within Site 19, the reality restructuring event will not be localized. It will ripple across the entire North American continent. Initiate the Hume collapse, now." "Sir, we still have 3 MTF teams on the ground," Aristone protested. "The Foundation exists to protect the species, not its soldiers," 051 replied. "Activate the deep well." Deep in the bowels of the site, a massive, ancient machine, the heart of the Foundation's power, began to hum. It was the deep well reality anchor, a device that didn't just stabilize reality, but dictated it. The air in the corridor where the X-Men stood suddenly became impossibly thin. The lights died, replaced by a strange gray twilight. The walls began to lose their texture, becoming smooth, featureless planes of non-matter. I can't breathe," Rogue gasped, falling to her knees. Her stolen powers were flickering out, the anomalous energy being drained into the vacuum. Magneto collapsed, his mastery over magnetism vanishing as the fundamental forces of the universe were rewritten into a cold, static void. "The iron? I can't feel the iron." Even Xavier slumped in his chair, his mind becoming a silent, dark room. The Foundation was winning. They were normalizing the X-Men into extinction. But Jean Grey did not fall. She stood in the center of the gray void, her hair beginning to float as if caught in an invisible solar wind. She could feel the deep well trying to delete her. She could feel the clinical, mathematical cold of the O5 Council, trying to solve the equation of her soul. "No," a voice whispered. Not Jean's voice, but something older, something that had seen the birth of the first star and would see the death of the last. "The Foundation seeks to preserve the silence, but the Phoenix is the song." Jean's eyes snapped open, and they were no longer human. They were twin suns of pure, golden fire. She didn't fight the Hume collapse, she ignited it. The gray void was suddenly shattered by a pillar of incandescent flame that roared upward from the center of Site 19. The deep well groaned. The Scranton reality anchors, designed to hold the world together, began to turn white-hot and melt. On the Foundation's monitors, the Hume readings didn't just spike. The graphs shattered. Jean Grey was no longer a Type Green reality bender. She was a CK-class reality restructuring event in human form. "She's rewriting the site!" Aristone screamed as the walls of the observation room began to turn into crystalline glass. "The Hume level is infinite. She's not just an anomaly, she's the new reality." Outside, in the Black Hills, the world watched as a massive, bird-shaped shadow of golden fire erupted from the earth where Site 19 had stood. The Foundation's most secure facility didn't explode. It was transformed. The concrete turned to marble, the steel turned to gold, the cages turned into gardens. Jean stood at the heart of the fire, her arms outstretched. She could see every mind in the site, the frightened soldiers, the clinical scientists, and the ancient, twisted O5s. She could feel their fear, their desperation to keep the world safe by keeping it small. You fear the change. Jean's voice resonated through every mind on Earth, a telepathic broadcast that bypassed every Foundation shield. You fear the future because you cannot contain it, but the flame does not just destroy, it purifies. With a final blinding surge of power, Jean forced the Phoenix back. She didn't want to destroy the world. She wanted to show it what it could be. The fire receded, leaving the X-Men standing in the ruins of a Site-19 that looked like a temple to a future they hadn't yet earned. Logan helped Rogue to her feet, his eyes wide as he looked at the sky. The Hume levels were stabilizing, but the world felt different. The static of the Foundation's secret world was gone. "Jeannie?" Scott asked, stepping toward her. Jean turned, her eyes returning to their normal green, though a faint ember still glowed in the depths. She looked exhausted, but for the first time since they had arrived in this universe, she looked free. "The deep well is broken, Scott," she whispered. "The Foundation can't hide us anymore. And the world just saw what happens when you try to put evolution in a box." The transformation of Site-19 was not a mere physical restructuring. It was a conceptual wound in the history of the SCP Foundation. Where once there stood a gray, windowless monolith of concrete and cold secrets, there now bloomed a crystalline garden that defied every law of the Foundation's normalcy. The gardens within the ruins smelled of jasmine and ancient earth, and the walls of the shattered containment wing were now translucent, shifting from marble to a substance that resembled frozen sunlight. In the aftermath of the Phoenix's fire, the air was still, but the psychological atmosphere across the globe was a hurricane. The Phoenix site had been seen by billions. It had bypassed every memetic filter, every internet kill switch, and every disinformation bot the Foundation possessed. For the first time in human history, the entire species had shared a single, telepathic vision of a bird of fire shattering the chains of the dark. "The Hume levels are perfect," Beast said, his voice hushed with awe as he looked at his Kant counter. The device, which had spent hours pinned in the black of reality stabilization, now sat at a rock-solid 100. "Jean, you didn't just break the anchors, you recalibrated the local reality. This isn't an anomaly anymore." "It's natural. It won't stay that way," Cyclops warned, his visor scanning the horizon. "The Foundation is down, but they aren't out, and the world outside this garden is still terrified." He was right. On the outskirts of the transformed site, the remnants of MTF Nu 7 and the GOC's orange suits were regrouping. But they were no longer the primary threat. From the shadows of the surrounding forests, a new signal began to bleed through the tactical frequencies, a jagged, discordant broadcast that smelled of rot and rusted iron. "Delta Command to all units," a distorted, mocking voice hissed over the radio channels. "The jailers have failed. The book burners are broken. The engine of evolution is ripe for the taking. Initiate the reaping protocol. The chaos insurgency," Logan growled, his nose wrinkling as he caught a scent that made his hackles rise. A mix of high-grade explosives and the wet dog smell of SCP-682's regenerative slurry. They've been waiting for the Foundation to trip so they could move in and grab the spoils. Unlike the Foundation, which sought to contain, or the GOC, which sought to destroy, the Chaos Insurgency sought to weaponize. To them, the X-Men weren't a threat or a gift. They were a biological resource. Suddenly, the ground beneath the crystalline garden buckled. 3 massive drill-tipped transport pods erupted from the earth, Chaos Insurgency breaching engines. The pods hissed open, but no soldiers stepped out. Instead, they unleashed the engineered ones, horrific, biomechanical monstrosities, stitched together from the DNA of a dozen neutralized Keter-class entities, and powered by stolen Foundation technology. "They're using our own data against us," a voice cried out. The X-Men turned to see Dr. Aristone and a handful of Foundation scientists stumbling out of a nearby marble-transformed corridor. Aristone's lab coat was scorched, and she was clutching a reinforced data drive to her chest. Behind her, Commander Vance led a small group of survivors, their weapons lowered, their faces masks of shock. "The insurgency hacked our genetic database during the Hume collapse," Aristone shouted, her eyes wide with terror. "They have the mapping for the X gene. They're trying to stabilize the mutation, using the Bell-E anomalous virus. They don't want to save you. They want to turn your DNA into an infectious tactical weapon. We can't let that data leave this site." Xavier said, his mental voice a calm, focused anchor for his team. Scott, Magneto, we have a common enemy. If the insurgency gains control of the X gene, the chaos that follows will be far worse than any containment the Foundation ever dreamed of. I never thought I'd be fighting side by side with the men who tried to biopsy my marrow, Rogue muttered, her hands glowing as she prepared for the charge. The enemy of my enemy is a useful tool, Rogue, Magneto said, his hands rising. Even without the metal of the site's structure, now turned to non-magnetic crystal, he found plenty to work with. He reached out to the insurgency's breaching engines, his power seizing the massive, gear-driven drills. But let us be clear. Once the Reapers are dead, the conversation about our freedom resumes. The battle was a visceral collision of ideologies. The Chaos Insurgency's monstrosities were relentless, their flesh regenerating from optic blasts, and their claws dripping with a reality-corroding acid. But they were fighting the X-Men at the height of their synergy. Storm ascended into the sky, which was no longer suppressed by anchors. She didn't just summon a storm, she became a goddess of the atmosphere. She called down a localized hurricane that picked up the insurgency's heavy armor and smashed it against the crystalline walls of the site. Wolverine and Vance found themselves back-to-back, a feral mutant and a Foundation commander fighting a swarm of biomechanical drones. "I don't like you, bub," Logan shouted, his claws slicing through a drone's power core. "The feeling is mutual. O1A, Vance replied, firing his resonance cannon into a monster's throat. "But you fight better than any MTF I've ever commanded." In the center of the garden, Cyclops and Jean Grey stood firm. Jean didn't call on the Phoenix. She didn't need to. Her own telekinesis was a surgical blade, tearing the insurgency's reality nullifier grenades out of the air before they could detonate. Cyclops coordinated the defense, his tactical mind seeing the flow of the battle as a series of vectors and pressure points. "Jean, the lead pod," Cyclops shouted. "It's preparing to launch a viral payload. If that hits the atmosphere, the X gene becomes an airborne contagion." Jean focused her mind, but she felt a sudden sharp spike of psychic pain. The Chaos Insurgency had deployed a siren device, a stolen mimetic weapon that broadcast the psychic agony of 1,000 tortured souls. She faltered, her telekinetic shield flickering. "Jean!" Before the insurgency could fire, a blur of silver and blue hit the pod. Beast had used a Foundation gravity harness to launch himself like a projectile, slamming his fist into the pod's ignition system. At the same moment, Magneto crushed the pod's outer hull, the metal collapsing inward and detonating the viral payload within the containment field. Jean had managed to snap back into place. The explosion was a dull, muffled thud of collapsing reality. The insurgency's reaping had failed. As the remaining insurgency units retreated into the shadows, a heavy silence returned to the garden. The X-Men stood amongst the ruins, exhausted but unbroken. Dr. Aristone stepped forward, looking at the X-Men, then at the data drive in her hand. She looked at Commander Vance, who gave her a slow, weary nod. Aristone walked to the edge of a crystalline fountain and dropped the drive into the silver liquid. "The Foundation's mission was to protect humanity," she said, her voice shaking. "But we forgot that humanity includes the things we don't understand. The data is destroyed. The X gene belongs to you." "A noble gesture, Doctor," Magneto said, his voice cold. "But the world still saw the bird of fire. They still saw your normalcy burn. You cannot put the secret back in the box." "We don't want to," Vance said, stepping forward and removing his tactical helmet. He looked at Professor Xavier. "The O5 Council is in hiding. The GOC is in a state of emergency. But for those of us on the ground, we saw the truth. You didn't destroy the world. You saved it from the people who wanted to steal its future." Xavier nodded, his expression one of cautious hope. "A new masquerade is beginning, Commander. One where the truth is the only thing we have left to protect us." But as the X-Men looked up, they saw the sky wasn't empty. Thousands of news drones were still there, their lights flickering like stars. The world was waiting for a statement. The X-Men were no longer just mutants, and they were no longer just skeeps. They were the bridge between two worlds that had finally, violently, met. The sun that rose over the Black Hills the following morning did not shine upon the world the Foundation had spent a century perfecting. It shone upon a reality that had been fundamentally, irrevocably altered. Site 19, once the most feared secret on the planet, had become a translucent cathedral of crystalline growth and marble pillars, a beacon of anomalous beauty, visible for 50 miles in every direction. The Phoenix event had become the most documented moment in human history, a shared telepathic and visual epiphany that had scorched away the last remnants of the veil. In the center of the crystalline garden, Professor Charles Xavier sat in silence, his eyes closed as he felt the psychic weather of the planet. It was a tempest. He felt the shock of billions, the religious fervor of new cults rising to worship the golden bird, and the cold, calculating dread of the world's governments. But beneath the noise, he felt something he hadn't expected, a profound, collective exhaling. The secret was out. The burden of normalcy had been lifted, and in its place was a terrifying, exhilarating uncertainty. The UN has declared a global state of emergency, Scott Summers said, stepping into the plaza. He looked tired, his uniform scorched, but his posture was steady. The Global Occult Coalition has retreated to their oversights, and the Foundation's remaining administrative staff is calling for a ceasefire. They've designated this entire region as sovereign anomalous territory. For the first time in our lives, Scott, we have a home that no one can legally touch. A home built on the ruins of a prison, Magneto said, appearing from the shadow of a crystalline willow. He wasn't wearing his helmet. His white hair caught the morning light, making him look less like a terrorist and more like a weary patriarch. The Foundation has not surrendered, Charles. They have simply realized that a direct confrontation with a phoenix bearer and a master of magnetism is a bad investment. They are already lobbying the UN for the Mutant Containment Act. They want to move the cages from the basement to the courtroom. Let them try, Jean Grey said, her voice soft but resonating with an inner strength that made the nearby crystals hum. She was standing by the fountain, watching the silver liquid flow. The world doesn't want cages anymore, Eric. I can feel it. They're tired of being told that the universe is a dark room full of monsters. They want to see the light, even if it burns. The X-Men had gathered at the heart of the site. Storm, Beast, Logan, Rogue, and the younger students who had emerged from the way after the chaos subsided. They were joined by a surprising group of companions, Dr. Aristone, Commander Vance, and a handful of Foundation personnel who had seen the truth in the fire. In the wake of the insurgency's defeat, a strange, localized peace had formed. The Foundation scientists were already working with Beast, not to cure the X gene, but to understand its place in the new world's ecology. We aren't leaving, are we, Professor? Rogue asked, looking at the shimmering walls of the new institute. Our world is far away, Rogue, Xavier replied, looking up at the news drones that still circled above like electronic vultures. And this world needs us. The Foundation and the GOC have spent centuries treating every anomalous child like a threat to be buried. We can offer a different path. We can show them that evolution isn't a breach, it's an invitation. The Site X designation is being formalized by the Ethics Committee, Dr. Aristone added, stepping forward with a tablet that displayed the new global accords. The O5 Council has been forced into a secondary role. The Foundation is being reorganized into a public safety and research entity. We will still contain the monsters, the things that truly want to consume the world. But people like you aren't CPs anymore. You're the faculty. Logan grunted, leaning against a pillar. Don't expect me to wear a lab coat, Doc. I'm still the guy who lets the monsters out. And the world will need that too, Logan, Storm said, her hand resting on his shoulder. The Chaos Insurgency is still out there. The Serpent's hand is still watching, and there are things in the Foundation's deep vaults that even Jean's fire didn't touch. The masquerade is broken, but the dark is still full of terrors. As the day progressed, the first civilian transport was allowed into the exclusion zone. It wasn't a military vehicle, but a bus filled with the families of the students who had disappeared during the initial Westchester event. The reunion was a chaotic, tearful spectacle, broadcast live to a world that was learning how to weep for the anomalous. Magneto watched the families from the balcony of the transformed mansion. He looked out over the Black Hills, his mind already calculating the next 10 years of political and physical struggle. He knew the peace wouldn't last. He knew the Foundation would try to regain control, and the GOC would continue to sharpen their god-killer spears. But as he looked at the children laughing in the crystalline garden, he felt a rare, quiet satisfaction. You were right, Charles, Magneto whispered to the wind. The fire did purify, but it is the metal that remains. The X-Men had entered the SCP Universe, as uncontained variables, a Keter-class threat to the very idea of human normalcy. They had been hunted, analyzed, and nearly deleted from existence. But in the end, they had done what they always did. They survived. They had broken the ultimate cage and revealed that the most dangerous anomaly in the universe was not a virus or a god, but the human heart's capacity to change. The Foundation's new motto was already being whispered in the halls of Site-19. It was no longer just secure, contain, protect. As Xavier's dream began to take root in the soil of a world of horrors, the words had evolved into something more profound. Secure the future. Contain the fear. Protect the evolution. The Broken Masquerade was over. The age of the X-Men had begun. Conclusion. The collision between the X-Men and the SCP Foundation did not end in the silence of a containment cell, but in the roar of a world reborn. By shattering the Foundation's monopoly on normalcy, the X-Men provided a third path for a humanity trapped between the cold bureaucracy of the O5 Council and the apocalyptic nihilism of the Chaos Insurgency. The crystalline garden of Site-19 stands today as a living monument to the Phoenix event, serving as both a school for the gifted and a diplomatic bridge between the baseline and the anomalous. While the GOC remains a distant threat, and the Serpent's Hand continues to whisper from the stacks of the library, the X-Men have established a new status quo. They are the guardians of a world where mutant and SCP are no longer death sentences, but chapters in the ongoing story of human potential. The O5s may still plot in their bunkers, and Magneto may still prepare for the inevitable strike. But for the first time, the future is not a file to be closed. It is a reality to be experienced. The X-Men have taught the Foundation that you cannot contain the tomorrow. You can only hope to be part of it.